a culinary time traveler in the heart of the Mongol Empire. What if you woke up 700 years in the past, surrounded by fierce Mongol warriors, with nothing but your wits and a frying pan to survive? Meet James Carter, a 29-year-old American chef from Chicago, who's about to face the ultimate test: transform the bland, morale-crushing meals of a 14th-century Mongol army into a feast that could change the course of history, or get him executed. How did a guy flipping burgers in 2025 end up cooking for a bloodthirsty Khan in 1300? And what secret power does he hold that could rewrite the fate of an empire? Stick around, because this wild, time-bending tale will reveal not just how James battles to survive, but a mysterious time door that could change everything you think you know about history. James Carter was no stranger to chaos. As a head chef at the Windy City Grill, a bustling Chicago restaurant known for its gourmet burgers and artisanal cocktails, he thrived in the high-pressure world of sizzling pans and impatient customers. At 29, he was a rising star in the culinary scene, with a knack for turning simple ingredients into mouth-watering masterpieces. His signature smoked brisket sliders had a cult following, and his Instagram was a gallery of perfectly plated dishes, each post racking up thousands of likes. But on a stormy night, in May 2025, everything changed. It started innocently enough. James was experimenting late at the Windy City Grill after closing, tweaking a new recipe for a chili rubbed ribeye. The kitchen was a sanctuary, filled with the hum of exhaust fans and the faint scent of charred spices. As he reached for a jar of smoked paprika, a strange hum filled the air. Not the usual buzz of the fridge, but something deeper, almost otherworldly. The lights flickered, and a gust of wind tore through the kitchen, despite every window being locked tight. Before James could react, a blinding flash enveloped him, and the world spun into darkness. When he opened his eyes, the sleek stainless steel of his Chicago kitchen was gone. Instead, he was sprawled on a windswept plain, the air thick with the smell of horse sweat and smoke. Towering above him were men in fur-lined armor, their faces weathered, their eyes sharp as the curved swords at their sides. James blinked, his chef's apron smeared with dirt, his trusty spatula still clutched in his hand. The men barked in a language he couldn't understand, their voices a mix of suspicion and curiosity. One thing was clear: this wasn't Illinois. This wasn't even 2025. Through a mix of frantic gestures and broken phrases, James pieced together the impossible truth. He was in Mongolia, in the year 1300, smack in the middle of the Mongol Empire under the rule of a fearsome Khan. How? Why? He had no answers, only a pounding heart and the sinking realization that he was a stranger in a brutal, unforgiving world. The Mongols, wary of this pale, clean-shaven man in strange clothes, dragged him to their sprawling encampment, a sea of felt yurts stretching across the steppe, alive with the clatter of blacksmiths and the neighing of warhorses. James's first glimpse of the camp's kitchen nearly made him gag. A muddy pit served as the cooking area, where grizzled cooks boiled chunks of mutton in dented cauldrons over open fires. The warrior's diet was grim: tough, flavorless meat, stale flatbread, and a sour fermented mare's milk called arag that tasted like regret. The food was so bad it sapped the spirit of even the fiercest fighters. James overheard grumbling soldiers, their morale as low as their energy, complaining about the monotony of their meals as they prepared for an impending battle against a rival tribe. Hunger was one thing, boredom was another, and in a world where strength and spirit meant survival, this was a crisis. As James stood there, a fish out of water in his checkered chef's pants, he realized something extraordinary. His skills, honed in the high-stakes kitchens of Chicago, might be his only way to survive. He wasn't a warrior, a scholar, or a diplomat, but he knew food. He knew how to make people happy with a single bite, how to turn a meal into a moment of joy. If he could transform the Mongols' dreary diet, he might not only save his own neck, but lift the spirits of an entire army. The stakes were high. A well-fed warrior was a fierce warrior, and the Khan's empire depended on victory. But there was a catch. The Mongols didn't trust outsiders, especially not one who appeared out of nowhere, babbling about barbecue and flavor profiles. Whispers spread through the camp. Was James a spy? A sorcerer? Or worse, A fool who'd get them all poisoned? And then there was the mysterious figure watching from the shadows, a cloaked woman with piercing eyes, muttering about a time door that had brought James here. Who was she? And why did she seem to know more about his arrival than he did? James Carter stood in the heart of the Mongol encampment, the wind whipping across the steppe, carrying the scent of smoke and unwashed warriors. His chef's apron, still smeared with Chicago grease and now dusted with Mongolian dirt, felt like his only tether to the modern world. The camp was a chaotic symphony of clanging swords, bellowing horses, and the low hum of distrustful murmurs. The Mongols eyed him warily, their hands never straying far from their curved blades. To them, James was an anomaly, a lanky, clean-shaven man in strange checkered pants who claimed he could fix their food. Fix it. Their meals were survival, not art. Yet, James saw an opportunity where they saw only suspicion. If he could transform their bland, soul-crushing diet, he might not only survive, but carve out a place in this brutal world. His first step was to win over the camp's head cook, a grizzled warrior named Timur, whose face bore more scars than a butcher's block. Timur was no chef in the modern sense. His culinary philosophy boiled down to boil it until it stops moving. His cauldron, a blackened monstrosity, churned out mutton so tough it could double as armor. James, with his spatula still clutched like a talisman, approached Timur's cooking pit, heart pounding. The air was thick with the sour tang of arag and the faint crackle of a dying fire. "Hey, Timur," James said, his Chicago accent jarring against the guttural Mongol tongue he was miraculously beginning to understand, a side effect of whatever force had yanked him through time. "Ever thought about grilling instead of boiling? You know, give that mutton some soul." Timur's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the hilt of a dagger. "Soul," he growled. "Meat fills bellies. You talk nonsense, outsider." The other cooks, a ragtag crew of soot-stained men, snickered. One spat into the dirt, muttering about soft foreigners. But James wasn't deterred. He'd faced skeptical food critics in Chicago. A few surly Mongols weren't going to stop him. With a grin that masked his nerves, he gestured to a nearby yurt. "This," he said, pointing to the felt tent, "is my battlefield kitchen. Give me one shot to cook for your men, and I'll make them forget they're eating mutton for the 100th time this week." The cooks roared with laughter, and Timur's scowl softened into a smirk. "You fail, Chicago man," he said, using the word James had let slip, "and we feed you to the wolves." The first experiment, barbecue on the steppe. James's plan was bold but simple. Introduce the Mongols to the magic of barbecue. In 2025, his smoked brisket sliders had made grown men weep at the Windy City Grill. If he could replicate even a fraction of that magic with the limited resources of 1300 Mongolia, he might win the camp's respect. The problem? The Mongols had no concept of slow cooking, spice rubs, or even a proper grill. Their idea of seasoning was a handful of dirt-tainted salt, and their cooking tools were crude at best. A few iron spits and those cursed cauldrons. James scoured the camp for anything he could use. He found wild onions growing near a stream, a stash of dried herbs that smelled vaguely like thyme, and a few clay pots that could serve as makeshift smokers. For wood, he bartered with a suspicious horse trader for scraps of dried tamarisk, which he hoped would mimic the smoky flavor of hickory. His first test run was a spectacle. Under the watchful eyes of Timur and a crowd of curious warriors, James rigged a crude grill using a salvaged sword blade balanced over a fire pit. He sliced mutton into thin strips, rubbed them with a paste of crushed onions, herbs, and salt, and laid them over the glowing tamarisk embers. The sizzle was music to his ears, and soon a rich, savory aroma wafted through the camp, a stark contrast to the usual stench of boiled meat. Warriors paused their sparring, their noses twitching like wolves catching a scent. Even Timur, arms crossed, leaned closer, his scowl faltering. When James offered the first piece of grilled mutton, dripping with juices and charred just right, Timur took a cautious bite. The crowd fell silent. Then Timur's eyes widened. He chewed slowly, then let out a grunt that could have been approval or indigestion. "Not bad," he muttered, grabbing another piece. The warriors erupted, shoving forward to try the Chicago man's fire meat. Laughter and shouts filled the air as they tore into the tender, smoky strips. For a moment, James felt a surge of triumph. He'd done it. He'd brought a taste of the 21st century to the Mongol steppe. But the victory was short-lived. As the crowd dispersed, a hulking warrior named Caesar, one of the Khan's trusted lieutenants, stormed forward. His face was a storm cloud, his voice a low growl. "You think you can charm us with tricks, outsider?" he snarled. "This fire meat. Where did you learn it? Are you a spy for the Jin? Or some witch sent to poison us?" The accusation hit like a thunderclap. Whispers spread like wildfire. Spy. Witch. Poison. James's heart sank. In Chicago, a bad Yelp review was the worst he'd faced. Here, a wrong move could mean a blade to the throat. The suspicion grows. Caesar's accusations weren't just personal, they were political. The Mongol Empire was a powder keg of rival tribes and fragile alliances, and an outsider like James was an easy target. Timur, torn between his grudging respect for James's cooking and his loyalty to the Khan, ordered him confined to a yurt under guard until his true purpose could be determined. Inside the dim, felt-lined tent, James paced, his mind racing. How had he ended up here? Was it the storm in Chicago? The strange hum in the kitchen? And who was the cloaked woman he'd glimpsed again, lingering near the camp's edge, her eyes glinting with secrets? Desperate for answers, James struck up a conversation with his guard, a young warrior named Bayer, who seemed more curious than hostile. Through halting exchanges, James learned that the camp was preparing for a critical battle against a rival tribe, the Karait, in just 5 days. The Khan, a fearsome leader named Temujin, better known to history as Genghis Khan, was under pressure to unite his fractious warriors. A victory would solidify his rule. A loss could fracture the empire. Food, Bayer admitted, was a sore point. The men were tired, their spirits worn thin by endless boiled mutton and the bitter cold of the steppe. "If your food can make us strong," Bayer said, his voice low, "maybe the Khan will spare you. But if you fail," he drew a finger across his throat. James saw his chance. If he could scale up his barbecue experiment to feed the entire army, he might prove his worth. But the challenges were daunting. The camp had limited supplies, mostly mutton, some barley, and a few root vegetables scavenged from the plains. There were no tomatoes for sauce, no sugar for glaze, no chili for heat. And then there was the time crunch. Caesar, eager to see James fail, had convinced Timur to give him just 2 days to prepare a feast for a small group of the Khan's elite warriors. If they approved, James could cook for the army. If not, he'd be branded a spy and face the Khan's wrath. The culinary hustle. James threw himself into the task with the same manic energy he'd once brought to a Saturday night dinner rush in Chicago. He enlisted Bayer's help to gather more wild onions, herbs, and even a few dried berries for a makeshift glaze. He scavenged broken cart wheels to build a larger grill, using clay pots to create a crude smoker for slow-cooking tougher cuts. His biggest innovation was a marinade inspired by his Windy City roots, a mix of crushed berries, salt, and rendered mutton fat, which he hoped would tenderize the meat and add a sweet tangy kick. He worked through the night, his hands blistered from hauling wood, his apron now a patchwork of soot and grease. The camp buzzed with curiosity, warriors peeking into his battlefield kitchen yurt, drawn by the unfamiliar smells. But trouble was brewing. Caesar, ever the skeptic, spread rumors that James's food was cursed, claiming the strange smells were proof of witchcraft. Some warriors began to avoid the cooking area, crossing themselves with gestures James didn't recognize. Even Timur, who tasted the grilled mutton, grew uneasy, muttering about unnatural flavors. The cloaked woman appeared again, slipping James a small pouch of unknown spices through the yurt's flap. "Use these," she whispered, her voice like wind over gravel. "They'll trust you if the food speaks to their souls." James stared at the pouch, his mind torn between gratitude and suspicion. Who was she? And why was she helping him? The first feast, a taste of triumph and tension. The night of the test feast arrived, and James was a bundle of nerves. Under a starlit sky, he presented his creation to a dozen of the Khan's elite warriors, including Caesar and Timur. The spread was modest but inspired. grilled mutton skewers glazed with berry marinade, roasted root vegetables sprinkled with the mystery spices, and flatbreads toasted over the fire. The warriors tore into the food, their grunts of approval mingling with the crackle of the fire. Kassar, however, remained stone-faced, picking at his skewer like it was evidence in a trial. "This is no Mongol food," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "What sorcery makes meat taste like this?" Before James could respond, Timur stood, wiping grease from his beard. "Sorcery or not," he bellowed, "this is the best meal I've eaten in years." The warriors roared in agreement, raising their skewers like swords. For a moment, James thought he'd won, but Kassar's eyes gleamed with malice. "If you're so skilled, outsider," he said, "prove it to the Khan himself. Feed his army before the battle, or your head will roll." The crowd fell silent, and James's stomach dropped. He'd survived the first test, but the real challenge was coming, and failure meant death. James's culinary crusade is heating up, and the stakes couldn't be higher. He's won a small victory, but the shadow of Kassar's distrust and the Khan's impending judgment looms large. Can a Chicago chef, armed with barbecue know-how and a mysterious pouch of spices, pull off a feast to save his life and rally an army? And what's the deal with the cloaked woman and her cryptic gifts? The tension is sizzling, and the next part, where James faces the Khan's impossible demand, will push him to the brink. Stay tuned for a high-stakes showdown that's equal parts delicious and deadly, with a twist that'll leave you hungry for answers. The Khan's ultimatum. The Mongol encampment buzzed with a feverish energy, the air thick with the scent of smoke, hoarse sweat, and anticipation. James Carter, the time-displaced chef from Chicago, stood at the edge of the camp's central fire pit, his heart hammering like a drum in a death metal band. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow over the sea of yurts, and the weight of his situation pressed down on him like a 1,000-pound cast-iron skillet. Just 2 days ago, he'd been a nobody in this 1,300 Mongol world, a strange outsider in checkered chef's pants, mocked for his fire meat. Now he faced an impossible challenge. Prepare a feast for the entire army of Temujin, Genghis Khan himself, in just 48 hours, to rally their spirits for a critical battle against the Karait tribe. Success would make him a hero. Failure? A one-way ticket to the executioner's blade. The ultimatum had come straight from the Khan's mouth, delivered through Kassar, the towering warrior who'd made it his mission to see James fail. Kassar's voice still echoed in James's ears. "Feed the Khan's warriors, Chicago man, or your head will adorn a pike before the moon rises twice." The threat wasn't empty. James had seen the Mongols' brutal efficiency, men who could slit a throat as casually as slicing bread. But it wasn't just his life on the line. The army's morale was crumbling, sapped by endless boiled mutton and the looming specter of war. If James's feast could ignite their spirits, it might tip the scales for victory. If it flopped, the Khan's empire could fracture, and James would take the blame. The impossible task. James stood in his makeshift battlefield kitchen, a cramped yurt now piled with salvaged supplies, slabs of mutton, sacks of barley, wild onions, and a meager stash of root vegetables. The mysterious pouch of spices from the cloaked woman, who'd vanished as quickly as she'd appeared, sat in his apron pocket, its contents a gamble he hadn't yet dared to use. The scale of the task was staggering. Feeding a few elite warriors had been tough enough. Now he had to cook for thousands of battle-hardened Mongols, with no modern tools, no refrigeration, and no margin for error. His Chicago kitchen, with its gas ranges and spice racks, felt like a distant dream. Here, his grill was a patchwork of scavenged cart wheels and sword blades, his smoker a stack of clay pots, teetering like a house of cards. He wasn't alone, though. Beer, the young warrior who'd become his reluctant ally, hovered nearby, his boyish curiosity a stark contrast to the camp's grim atmosphere. Timur, the grizzled head cook, had grudgingly agreed to help, though his loyalty wavered under Kassar's watchful glare. "You'd better make this work, Chicago man," Timur muttered, sharpening a cleaver with unsettling focus. "The Khan doesn't forgive failure." James forced a grin, his hands trembling as he sliced mutton. "Don't worry, Timur. I've got this. It's just like catering a Bears game tailgate, except with higher stakes and worse ingredients." His plan was ambitious. A feast inspired by his Windy City roots, scaled up for a Mongol army. Grilled mutton skewers glazed with a berry and fat marinade, smoky roasted vegetables, and barley flatbreads toasted crisp over open fires. The mystery spices, which smelled faintly of cumin and something floral, would be his secret weapon, if they didn't backfire. But the challenges piled up like storm clouds. The camp supplies were dwindling. The wood for his grills was damp from a recent rain, and Kassar's whispers of witchcraft had spread, making some warriors refuse to touch James's food. Worst of all, time was slipping away. 2 days to feed thousands? Even Gordon Ramsay would have thrown in the towel. The race against time. James threw himself into the chaos with the frenetic energy of a chef in the weeds during a dinner rush. He rallied Buyur and a handful of skeptical cooks, teaching them to slice mutton thin for faster grilling and knead barley dough for flatbreads. He scoured the camp for anything edible, bartering his spatula, now a curiosity among the Mongols, for a stash of dried plums to sweeten his glaze. The cloaked woman's spices became his lifeline. A pinch transformed his test batch of mutton into something so fragrant it made Buyur's eyes water with joy. "This is food for gods," Buyur exclaimed, sneaking a second bite. James laughed, but his gut churned. What if the spices were too foreign? What if Kassar was right, and the Mongols rejected his sorcery? As the first day bled into night, James worked by firelight, his hands blistered, his apron a canvas of grease and soot. The camp pulsed with tension, warriors sharpening blades, shamans chanting for victory, and Kassar prowling like a wolf, ready to pounce on any misstep. At one point, a fire flared too high, nearly engulfing a stack of flatbreads. James dove to save them, earning a burn on his forearm and a round of laughter from the cooks. "You fight like a Mongol," Timur said, slapping his back. For the first time, James felt a flicker of belonging. But the clock was ticking, and Kassar spies were everywhere, reporting every hiccup to the Khan. Then came the sabotage. On the second morning, James woke to find his claypot smoker shattered, the pieces scattered like a warning. His stash of wild onions had vanished, and half his wood was soaked in mare's milk, rendering it useless. Kassar's doing, no doubt. Rage boiled in James's chest, but he had no time for revenge. He improvised, rigging new smokers from broken shields and drying the wood over smaller fires. Buyur, risking Kassar's wrath, smuggled more onions from a trader's cart. "You're mad, Chicago man," Buyur whispered, a grin breaking through his fear. "But I like mad." The feast of fate. The night of the feast arrived, and the camp transformed into a theater of fire and anticipation. Torches blazed, casting flickering shadows over the gathered warriors, their faces a mix of hunger and suspicion. At the center sat Temujin, the Khan himself, his presence like a storm cloud, silent, commanding, his eyes sharp enough to cut through bone. James felt the weight of those eyes as he directed his ragtag crew, grilling skewers over roaring fires, roasting vegetables in clay pots, and stacking flatbreads in towering piles. The air was alive with the sizzle of meat, the sweet tang of berry glaze, and the heady aroma of those mystery spices. It was a sensory assault, and James prayed it would be enough. The first plates reached the Khan's table, carried by Buyur, who shot James a nervous thumbs up, a gesture James had taught him. Temujin took a skewer, sniffed it, and bit. The camp held its breath. Then a slow nod. "This is different," the Khan said, his voice low but resonant. He took another bite, then another. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the warriors followed suit, tearing into the food with ravenous glee. Grunts of approval turned to shouts, then laughter, as the smoky, tender mutton and crisp flatbreads vanished faster than James could cook. Even Timur, usually stoic, was grinning, grease glistening in his beard. For a moment, James dared to hope. He'd done it. He'd turned a Chicago tailgate dream into a Mongol masterpiece. But Kassar wasn't finished. As the feast peaked, he stood, his voice cutting through the revelry like a blade. "This man poisons us with strange magic," he roared, holding up a skewer. I felt a fire in my belly unnatural. "He's no cook, but a spy sent to weaken us before battle." The crowd faltered, some warriors dropping their food, fear flickering in their eyes. James's heart sank. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at him. "Kassar, you tasted the food. You liked it. This isn't poison, it's flavor. It's strength for your fight tomorrow. Try it again. Or are you afraid of a little Chicago spice?" The crowd erupted in laughter, but the Khan's face was unreadable. He raised a hand, silencing the camp. "You speak boldly, outsider," he said. "But words are cheap. Prove your food gives us strength. Feed my personal guard now, and if they falter in tomorrow's battle, your life is forfeit." The guard, 10 of the Khan's fiercest warriors, stepped forward, their eyes daring James to fail. With no time to think, James grabbed his best skewers, sprinkled them with the last of the mystery spices, and served them himself, his hands shaking but his face a mask of confidence. The guards ate, their expressions shifting from doubt to delight. One, a giant named Badu, clapped James on the shoulder so hard he nearly fell. "This man cooks like a warrior fights." Badu bellowed, and the crowd cheered. The resolution of the climax. The feast was a triumph, but the tension didn't break. It exploded into chaos. As the warriors ate, a commotion erupted at the camp's edge. The cloaked woman appeared, her hood falling to reveal a face etched with strange tattoos, her eyes blazing with urgency. "The Carrot are coming," she shouted. "They attack at dawn." Panic swept the camp, but the Khan's voice cut through it. "We fight with full bellies and fire in our hearts," he roared, raising a skewer. The warriors roared back, their spirits ignited by James's food and the Khan's words. James, caught in the whirlwind, realized his feast had done more than fill stomachs. It had unified a fractured army. As the camp scrambled to prepare for battle, the Khan summoned James. "You've proven your worth, Chicago man," he said, his gaze piercing. "Stay, cook for my empire, and you'll have honor." But before James could respond, the cloaked woman slipped beside him, whispering, "The time door awaits. You can return to your world, or stay and change this one. Choose quickly." James's mind reeled. Home, Chicago, his kitchen, his life, or this wild, dangerous world where he was a hero. The battle loomed, and so did his decision. James's feast was a heart-pounding triumph, but the story's far from over. With the Carrot attack hours away and the mysterious time door dangling before him, James faces a choice that could rewrite history or strand him forever. Will he stay to cement his legend as the Khan's chef, or risk everything to chase away home? And who was the cloaked woman, with her strange spices and cryptic warnings? The final chapter will unravel these mysteries, delivering a twist that'll leave you stunned and craving more. Stick with us for a conclusion as bold and unforgettable as James's Mongol barbecue. The dawn of battle and decision. The Mongol encampment was a whirlwind of chaos as dawn broke over the steppe, painting the sky in streaks of fire and shadow. The air crackled with the clash of steel, the thunder of hooves, and the raw, primal energy of an army bracing for war. James Carter, the Chicago chef who'd stumbled through a timed door into the heart of the Mongol Empire, stood at the edge of the camp, his chef's apron now a tattered banner of his improbable journey. The feast he'd prepared the night before, grilled mutton skewers glazed with berry marinade, smoky roasted vegetables, and fragrant flatbreads spiked with mysterious spices, had transformed the warrior spirits. Their laughter and roars of approval still echoed in his ears, a stark contrast to the grim reality now unfolding. The Carrot tribe's attack was imminent, and the Khan's army, fueled by James's food, was ready to fight. But for James, the real battle was within. Stay in this brutal, exhilarating world where he'd become a hero, or chase the mysterious time door back to his 2025 Chicago life. The cloaked woman's words haunted him. The time door awaits. Choose quickly. Her tattooed face and piercing eyes lingered in his mind, as did the pouch of spices that had saved his feast and maybe his life. Who was she? A shaman? A time traveler like him? Her cryptic warnings and gifts had guided him through the chaos, but her motives were as murky as the steppes dawn mist. As the camp mobilized, James caught a glimpse of her at the edge of a yurt, gesturing toward a rocky outcrop beyond the camp. Was that where the time door hid? His heart pounded, torn between the pull of home The Windy City Grill, his Instagram fame, his familiar chaos, and the wild allure of this world, where his food had turned skeptics into allies and earned him the Khan's respect. The battle's edge in a hero's moment. Before James could dwell on his choice, the ground shook with the approach of the Kharid. War cries pierced the air, and the Khan's warriors surged forward, their faces fierce with the fire James's feast had kindled. Temujin, Genghis Khan himself, stood atop a rise, his fur-lined armor glinting, his presence a force of nature. He caught James's eye and nodded, a rare gesture that sent a shiver down James's spine. "Your food gave us strength, Chicago man," the Khan said, his voice like gravel. "Fight with us, or cook for us again. But choose now." It wasn't a request, it was a command, laced with the promise of glory or death. James's mind raced. Fight. He was no warrior, his hands more accustomed to a chef's knife than a sword. But cooking, that he could do. He glanced at Buyr, the young warrior who'd become his friend, now strapping on armor with a grin. "Come, Chicago man." Buyr called, tossing James a dagger. "Your food made us lions. Now roar with us." The camp's head cook, Timur, clapped James's shoulder, his scarred face breaking into a rare smile. "You're one of us now," he growled. "Don't let Kassar ruin it." Kassar, the warrior who'd nearly derailed James's feast with accusations of witchcraft, was nowhere to be seen, likely leading the charge against the Kharid, eager to prove his own worth. As the battle loomed, James made a split-second decision. He couldn't fight, but he could keep the army spirits high. He sprinted to his battlefield kitchen yurt, where his makeshift grills still smoldered. With Buyr's help, he fired them up, grilling leftover mutton and flatbreads to feed the rear guard and wounded warriors trickling back from the front. The aroma of smoky meat and mystery spices wafted through the camp, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. Warriors, bloodied but unbowed, grabbed skewers between clashes, their eyes blazing with gratitude. One, a grizzled archer named Jurgo, clasped James's arm. "Your food keeps us alive," he rasped. "You're no outsider now." The time door's temptation. As the battle raged beyond the camp, the cloaked woman appeared again, her presence like a shadow, slipping through the smoke. She pulled James aside, her voice urgent. "The time door is open, but not for long," she whispered, pointing to the rocky outcrop. "Go now, or stay forever." James's breath caught. He followed her gaze, and there, in the dawn light, he saw it. A faint shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt, rippling between two jagged stones. It was real. A way home. Chicago, his kitchen, his life, within reach. But as he looked back at the camp, at Buyr's grin, Timur's nod, and the warriors fighting with the strength his food had given them, he felt a pull just as strong. He'd changed this world, turned a ragtag army into a united force. Could he leave them now, with the battle's outcome uncertain? The woman's eyes softened, as if reading his thoughts. "You've done more than you know," she said. "Your food sparked a fire in their souls. But the door won't wait, and there's more at stake than you understand." She slipped a small, carved stone into his hand, its surface etched with symbols he couldn't decipher. "Keep this," she said. "It's your key, for this door or another." Before he could ask more, she vanished into the mist, leaving James clutching the stone, his mind a storm of questions. Was she guiding him home, or luring him deeper into this time-bending mystery? The open-ended choice. The battle's tide turned as the sun climbed higher. The Khan's warriors, fueled by James's feast, drove back the Kharid, their war cries echoing like thunder. Temujin returned, blood on his armor but victory in his eyes. He summoned James, his voice carrying a rare warmth. "You've earned a place here, Chicago man," he said. "Stay, and your name will live in our songs. Cook for my empire, and you'll never want for honor." The warriors cheered, hoisting skewers in salute. Buyr winked, and even Timur raised a rare toast with a cup of arag. James stood in the heart of the camp, a hero in a world not his own, his heart swelling with pride and tearing with doubt. He glanced at the rocky outcrop, where the shimmer of the time door still flickered, faint but undeniable. Home was there, Chicago, his restaurant, his life. But here, he was more than a chef. He was a legend, a man who turned food into power. The carved stone burned in his pocket, its symbols a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. Would he step through the door, risking an unknown return? Or stay, embracing a life of danger and glory? And what of the cloaked woman's warning? More at stake than you understand. Was the time door a gift, or a trap? As the warriors chanted his name, James took a step toward the outcrop, then stopped. The choice wasn't just about him anymore. The Khan's empire, the battle's aftermath, the mysterious woman's secrets, all hung in the balance. He tightened his grip on the stone, his eyes locked on the shimmering door, and whispered, "What the hell comes next?" James Carter's journey has reached a heart-pounding crossroads, but the story's far from over. Will he step through the time door, chasing his Chicago life, or stay to become a legend in the Mongol Empire? What secrets does the carved stone hold? And who is the cloaked woman pulling the strings of time? This open-ended finale leaves you teetering on the edge of a mystery that's as spicy as James's barbecue and twice as dangerous. Hungry for answers? The next chapter of this wild, time-bending saga is coming soon, and it's packed with twists that'll leave your jaw on the floor. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us on our channel to find out what fate awaits James, and whether the time door leads home, or somewhere even stranger. You won't want to miss a single bite of this adventure.